Okay, another day. Okay, so yesterday I discussed, so as we're now publishing entities to Kafka, I need to acquire those and the view needs to consume them and kind of reconstitute the objects. But in terms of the schema, there's no benefit in pushing the shared identifiers into the associated objects when we can benefit from primary key lookups in terms of when we're querying the data. So to avoid that, I need to know that the user exists so I can put a valid user ID in, or I need to know the tenant exists so I can put a valid tenant in. You're not guaranteed the order of these messages, right? You're only guaranteed the ordering of messages within one partition within a topic with Kafka. But you're not guaranteed that you're not going to receive a user before a tenant or a planning item before a user or whatever. So you don't know this information is going to be there. So I've got to acquire all the associated things. So I'm going to do is I'm going to do something similar to this, right? Var tenant ID equals sender.send acquire tenant dot command event dot tenant identifier, right? And I'm going to do the bare minimum for each object. Again, if so, var assigned user ID equals event dot. I don't know why I just want to do that. Event dot assigned user ID not equal to null. So if it's not null, then assigned user ID equals create user by user ID equals and event dot assigned user identifier equals event. It really does not want me to have that word event, but it is an event. So I'm gonna hold to that, right? That's just gonna be the way I'm gonna do it. Then created by user ID. Otherwise, and these need to be awaits. These can't be. Otherwise, you're gonna await sender.send new acquire user dot command. And then that's going to be event dot. Oh, hold on, how do I? Did I? Yeah, I did. That's because I did this. I think that's interfering. A demonstration. Event dot assigned user identifier. So something like that, right? And then when this sends, this doesn't do this. This sends in created by user ID. This sends in tenant ID and signed user ID, right? And that way, that way this will kind of join all the things together. That's async. I mean, they don't exist yet, so that's okay. So, probably want a tests folder. And then tests, I think, is the actual folder. Yeah. And then we're going to have view.infrastructure test. You can use the period when I do it this way. Consumers. Class library. There you are. Oh no, there's no new unit test project. Extra unit. Ooh, in unit and playwright. Huh. Well, that is something I want to play with. There you go. Considering the other dependencies I have to add there anyway, doesn't really save me a great deal of time. It does include the 3 that I need primarily. Do a mock. I will be right back. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so I'm going to write a test to kind of cover this behavior, right? I know what I need. So not exactly in the spirit of unit testing, but I need to think through this anyway, right? So in the future, I can write the test without that. So let's when so from this perspective, there's no real behavior other than assigned user, right? I'm just saying, hey, I need to make sure that I acquire the created user, I acquire the tenant ID. And the reason I'm doing it in here is because I kind of see this as do I want to do it in here? Because if it's an application behavior that I have to do, then the application should technically own it, because the application is meant to coordinate. Now, this is a domain service behavior, but the application, I could send this straight through, right, with all the data, and then do this part on the application, which might be more expected, right? Because I'm in the application layer, I'm not in the the intent of the application layer is to kind of coordinate behavior, and this is behavior no matter what I think about it, right? I do need these things to happen, and to say that they exist in the infrastructure layer, then I'm using this to coordinate. So this should really be a send through, and then this should be this should actually be the application. Yeah. I think that's more appropriate. So when planning item activation event received, the fact is update planning item command is sent. That's really all I care about in this, right? So let's do arrange act. Protected override arrange. So here we're going to need private sender equals private planning item receiver is our subject. That basically included mediator implicitly through receivers, through consumers there. That's okay. Not going to hurt us. So sender equals substitute for iSender. Subject is a new planning item receiver of sender, right? Our act is something similar to this. And now I need to set all these, right? Like that. Kind of. Introduce field. This is the expected identifier. read only. Tools. Grid. It'll take me twice as long to do that way. Private read only grid. Expected tenant identifier. Come on, you can help me. Private. Yeah. Private. Yeah. Private. Yeah. Private. I'm not so stubborn as to not expect to not want to use those sorts of tools where it's going to help me fill in those things. It's not like I didn't check everything I was seeing then. So the only difference I might want to do is whether this is null or not, but I don't think that matters to this particularly. It just needs to make sure it passes it. Whatever I pass in, it passes forward. So yeah. And what we're doing is sender dot received. Oh, that's right. Right. Now we need to make this command, right? There we go. The problem is obviously this is now in the wrong place, but that's at least what I'm expecting to do. Right? So I'm expecting that these are going to be passed through. And it actually maintained the order that I actually set it in the receiver code. I put tenant first. So let's create our application layer now. Source view application class library. Anyone joining the stream for the first time, you're more than welcome to ask any questions. This isn't necessarily me being productive. This is me being updating applying items. Yeah, this is just me sharing the code. I don't really mind if we divert talk time. Okay, so that needs its own mediator, loss generator. I'll implicitly include abstractions, but let's make sure it's explicit. Now this needs to go away. This is now going to reference application. That's going to work still. That's going to reference mediator. Because the API layers, it seems to be the trend to move basically through the API layers and just straight forward through. So I think fast endpoints has some level of messaging in it. That I command stuff exists in fast endpoints as well, so I don't want to risk adding that in, because that will create a mess. And here I'm going to create a handler, right? I almost got it right. And this is what I'm going to write test now. Newbie question, is this Rider? Yes, this is Rider. Hello, Dukesoft. How you doing? Yeah, Rider is my IDE of choice. So now this should run and pass. Oh. Why did you not run and pass? I didn't do it. Commented it out. So we're going to do event.tenant identifier. Event dot created by user identifier and event dot signed user identifier. Do that, and then this is going to reference our application. All should be good. Our test should pass. There we go. Okay, so let's now write the harder test here. View.application.tests. I forgot the template exists. Microsoft.tests SDK and substitute. Okay. Set up a global usings. Global using X unit. Global using substitute. So we now need to implement this, and like I said, I'm going to use that acquire pattern. So the discussion yesterday was whether acquire was a good design, right? Because acquire, when I say acquire, I mean it's basically create if not exists. I need internal IDs for objects that may or may not exist at the time this command is received, right? Do I want to back up Kafka by saying, nope, I don't want to process this message? No, I don't. I really don't. I don't want to risk losing messages. Do I want to introduce an extra layer in between? I think there's a possibility for that, and it might be worthwhile exploring the priority queue concept. But for this, I think it might be a lot more engineering effort and introduce a lot more risk than I'm really wanting to do. Because although it might not be ideal in terms of a design pattern, when I say acquire, it's literally create a command handler that is calling the repository for the object, saying, do you exist? No, I don't. Okay, create it. It's not I'm not defining that when I create the object. I'm using the identifier. So it's not like Entity Framework can fill this in for me, right? Because I'm using this value. So if I create a planning item, it's going to have an associated tenant. Hi, hype time. Do I use CQRS? Yes, I do. Yeah. And actually, I'm probably taking CQRS to the most extreme I've ever taken it realistically right now. This is my current aim. So I have these APIs where I insert data into, and they are pure write APIs now. They publish objects to Kafka, and I'm working on this part now where I consume and read. So I'm probably going to the most extreme implementation of CQRS that I've ever done. Benefit of this is these data stores can store the objects they need, optimized for just updating and storing the information. This data store here can combine all these objects accurately and be optimized for that read pattern. And then my read APIs are able to pull that, and I can put GraphQL or whatever in front of this and not worry about my storage schema. So I use Mediator a lot. So I'm using fast endpoints for my API endpoints, and then I'm using Mediator. Mediator, not Mediator. Subtle difference, I know, but yeah, that's what's giving me the patterns I'm using. Okay, so this planning item, we need to write some tests. So when update, what am I doing? Concerning update planning item. When so the only difference here is there's three scenarios. That it's always going to acquire all the created by user ID and the tenant identifier, the tenant ID. That's always going to be an acquire, right? The only difference is the assigned user, in that if it's the same as the user, then I don't want to do another lookup. But if it's not, if it's null, then I don't want to set it. And if it's not null and it's not the same, then I want to do a lookup. So those are the only three major differences in this code path. So let's go with the most basic version right now and make it work, and then we'll come back over and add the extra. So when assigned user identifier is null, fact planning item is created, fact acquire created by user ID is called, fact acquire tenant ID is called, acquire tenant acquire user is called for created by user identifier. So my testing style, if you're used to unit testing, may seem a little different. It may seem a little odd. Don't worry about it. If you have any thoughts or opinions on it, you're more than welcome to share. But this is my way of unit testing. So we're gonna have private. We don't no private update planning item dot handler. That's our subject in this case. And right now we don't need to do anything. So the downside to this pattern, what I'm about to do is the recommendation, if you read Jimmy Bogard's guide on using Mediator, is that an individual handler should never invoke the Mediator again, right? So you shouldn't be using these to chain these together. So that's why initially I thought maybe this has those calls in it, because then I'm getting around that rule, right? I'm entering into here. So I have another pattern for this, which might actually be Well, it's not another pattern. It's another library, another piece I've built for creating a use case that would get around this. But I don't think there's any benefit. I don't see the harm in doing what I'm about to do. I think it's very logical. And if a better pattern comes along, if someone with more distributed systems knowledge comes along and says, "Hey, you should use this way," and I can go off and learn that, then maybe I go back and change this. But as long as the code's in the place where I need it to be anyway, then I'm fine. I can refactor later on and not panic. So I'm not going to worry about doing that right this second. Yeah. So our subject is a new handler. And then we're going to do subject dot handle new command. This is going to be expected tenant identifier. Right. Translation token none. Get a waiter. Get a result. Right. We don't want to invoke that now. This is not advised normally, but I'm in a unit test, so I don't really mind. There's not going to be any knock-on effects. Okay, so let's create all that data. Okay. So we should handle that, and then we expect, what do we expect? Well, we expect a planning item is created, so we now need a repository. We don't have infrastructure yet. So we need some infrastructure now. View infrastructure. Okay, so this is going to be a, what would this be? What do I call it? Planning repository. View repository, I suppose. That sounds weird, but yeah, view repository. So right now I term this view, right? Realistically, that just means I'm in this layer here. I'm trying to do my read API. I don't want to call it read. It doesn't have to be called view eventually, but it is realistically all the data consumed that will be purely for query. Maybe there's a better term, I don't know. This is an right. This is where this gets into play now. So I need some extra parts here. Contexts. Not that there's going to be many contexts there, but yeah. View DB context. So add entity framework. Framework core. Check what this has got. Just entity framework core. Okay, good. Keep it minimal. DB context options of view DB context. Options. DB context. Options. Right. So that's configuring our basic database. Now this looks like this. This is a generic repository used for this. So all instances of this view repository will, I'll set it up so that basically if I ask for I repository of X, it's going to give me back an instance of this, of the X, or T. VDB context. And this is going to be share kernel. There we go. Okay. You can do that now as well. That's so nice. Apex, thank you very much for the look. Appreciate it. So what I'm doing is I'm just putting the stubs of the pieces in place. I'm trying not to rush ahead and do too much, etc. So but for planning item is created, I need to know that the repository received it. So I need a repository, right? So private I repository of planning item. This is where I run the risk. If I hit Alt Enter on this right now, I don't have. Or do I? Yes, I do. Okay, I do have the entities. So I have the entities here. So let's put them in the context. Make sure that I have DB set planning item user. That's nothing. Public DB set tenants. Public DB set tenant users. Something there. Yeah, I almost if I reference planning domain, then I'll pull in the wrong dependency. And it's where using multiple solutions. Come on, Junicus, how you doing? Using multiple solutions can actually help keep this cleaner, because then I can have a solution just for view, have a solution just for teams, have a solution just for for planning, and I can work within those components without actually worrying about the rest. Okay, so this is going to be view domain and share kernel. So planning item repository equals substitute for. Then we need to interject that into there. This now takes an I repository of planning item repository. That's an okay direction, right? Tendency project domain. Should not reference. Yeah, domain and share kernel. So what I'm testing here is ironically planning item repository dot received dot add async arg dot is planning item. So this is where this breaks, because now I need these to be IDs. These can't be this can't be. Oh, I didn't allow for it. I didn't put identifier in here. New column. View planning items. Hey Thorolf, how you doing? How's things? So this needs to be private read only int to tenant ID equals 1. That needs to be that. Identifier should be on planning items, so let's do that. Public GUID identifier. This should be created by user ID, and this should be assigned user ID, and that should be ID, right? So I should have another private read-only int equals 9. I'm just making those numbers very obviously nowhere near each other, so that if I see them in test data, I don't end up thinking they could have done something. So that's what I'm expecting. Let's see if this builds and fails. Okay, so it does. So here I need to do, again, the advice is not to use a mediator once you're inside the mediator, but I'm not worried about that pattern right this second. I think it's easier. I'm good, relaxing on my day off. I need to head out and be a real person again. It's tough being a real person. Much easier to stay inside. So let's do sender equals null. Yeah, it's overrated. So I'm gonna send this in. Let's do this. Sender. And again, this is not advised, but again, if someone comes along and shows me a better pattern in the future, then I can change this because I know it's all in one place. If I distribute this now and break this up, then I'm going to make it harder for myself in the future. So what I'm dealing with, for those who haven't been in here, is I'm creating a view, right? So I have all my data stored up here in the top level objects, right? In my main APIs, the data is stored there. I'm now producing that data to Kafka and consuming it for a read database. Benefit being I can join all this information together. I can write GraphQL or whatever APIs I want on front of it, but optimize it solidly for the read data. With that comes some challenges because of distributed computing. You're not always guaranteed you're going to get events in the same order or the correct order to make sure your system integrity is preserved. So I might receive a planning item before I've even received a tenant or a user, but I've built a dependency on the primary keys of those objects, right? Because I don't want to be using these unique identifiers everywhere to identify everything, right? It's much faster to join all that data on its primary key than it is to join it on this unique identifier. So again, for data integrity, even if I use the unique identifier here, I still want that object to exist, because then I would have to deal with the fact that it might not exist in the queries, right? So it's much better to have the data integrity than it is to have the the cost of having to verify things exist later on, right? So what happens if I receive a planning item before I receive a tenant? Well, I'm going to acquire, and I term it acquire because it's kind of a pattern or an approach a former colleague and I agreed upon finally, right? We argued for many hours over the necessity of doing this, catching exceptions, handling errors, and left joins instead of joins, etc. And we ended up on this acquire. So an acquire is a create if not exists, right? And it's called acquire because it returns back an ID for the object, regardless of whether it created it or not. You don't personally know whether it created it or not. It's not your concern. So that's why I'm calling it that. So I'm just going to stick with that naming. That person may actually help me with some of this code eventually. So it would be a familiar pattern as well. So in terms of the created user, I want to be able to say, okay, sender.received.send arg.is acquire user.command, right? X goes to, that's a good point. That is a very good point. User identifier, tenant user. Ooh. No, it's fine. It's fine. I don't need a tenant here, right? The user identifier is a global identifier for this user. It's not a tenant associated user identifier. So what my thought there was, hold on, I'm acquiring a user, but I don't have a tenant user. But I don't need to worry about that. That's fine. Right, so that's what I want to see. And then I also want to set in my arrange when sender does receive, sender.send arg.is, right, returns value task.from value from result result. Actually, I do want to return a result here, don't I? Yeah, I'm gonna return a result. So I need in application rdallis.result. Big fan of using the rdallis libraries. So now my test here, I want to do result dot success, and it returns expected user created by user ready, right? Let's fill this out now. So require user is a class, takes a command like that, and it actually takes a result of int. Right. this is if there's a failure or something, we want to make sure that we return an actual success. Okay, so that works. And then here, sender.received .send arg.is acquire tenant command. That looks very familiar. And then again here, we're all almost do the exact same thing, so I'm just going to copy and paste it. Just acquire tenant. Expected tenant identifier. And then this is expected tenant ID. Let's create that type. There you go. That should make them compile. So again, I'm saying, hey, when I call this and I call this, then return these objects, and then this should work when I wire these up, right? Red. Not implemented, not implemented, not implemented. That's fine. Let's move acquiring entities. This is going to go into view infrastructure, no, view application. Acquiring entities. And that. Let's move them both. Right. So again, if you're new to the stream, you're more than welcome to ask questions, what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, all those fun things. I have no issue discussing the code at the same time as writing the code. The stream is not necessarily about my productivity. If other people are benefiting from what I'm doing. Okay, so let's make sure that still builds and runs. Right. Now let's get it to actually pass. So in here, we need to repository dot add async new planning item. Now the planning the planning items and the objects in this side of things, in this view side of things, I'm not wrapping up in domain events. I'm not creating patterns for how to set them, because I don't care when these values change, right? I know these values have changed, and I can interpret that. I can put layers in to tell me what changed and why it changed, all over the place, right? But I don't need to do it in here. So in here, I can just set every field I need, right? Identifier equals command identifier. Title equals command dot title. Description equals command dot description. Review date equals command dot review date. Do I not have? Have I got that far and not had a review date on that planning item? It's there on the event. Have I not passed it forward? No, I have not. Date time. Interesting. Event dot review date. Ah, that's interesting. I didn't. That's a little haphazard the way I'm doing that, but I know that it's gonna be okay. Because again, I'm making sure that I'm kind of backfilling them. Okay, so now I need to get my created by user ID, right? So created by user ID equals sender.await await sender.send require user.command command new. I still think a static thing might help there, but so this is going to get me my. I remembered a little something I meant to configure for my image sharing. And I'm going to do the same here for this, right? Await sender send new fire tenant. Why didn't that break down to the next line? Oh, it's just slightly smaller. So now here, now I'll be co-working instead of just co-slacking. Tenant ID equals tenant ID. And created by user ID is created by user ID. Right. And then return. So can't do it that way. We need to do it this way. And this is where this is going to get messy, because this is going to test something that entity framework may or may not do, right? Return result.success planning item the ID, right? This needs to be, no, this doesn't care. Doesn't care. I don't update planning item. I don't care about this one. This has no response. Return statement missing. Why? The command handler. Why is return statement missing then? Right, so why do you need a return statement? I've not done this before. I'm going to return a result. Okay, so we'll follow that pattern. It's not a bad thing to return the result, right? It's just a result. Result. If I go return something, return result dot success. Okay, so let's run those unit tests. Okay, so they now pass. Yeah, it's something else I'm thinking of there. So that doesn't need to be broken out as a separate object. I'm thinking of the acquires before I'm thinking about this. So that's where this gets a little bit messy, because again, what I'm about to test is using in-memory stuff. It's not going to actually ever be a representation of the database, which means I can't guarantee the database will behave the exact same way. So I might get some quirks when I actually go to implement it. So Okay. View. Create scripts. View DB. Create structure for consumers. Okay, so now when assigned user identifier is not null. So the challenge here is most of this is the exact same, right? These should still be called, except an extra test should be in there. So I'm going to, just in the interest of saving time on the stream, I'm going to copy and paste this. It's not something I'd like to do because considering the amount of code I've written here, the chances of me leaving a requirement in or me leaving something that I really didn't want to leave in there is just higher. So this is going to be grid.new grid now, right? This is still a range act. Nginx configuration work first time. Quick, go play the lottery. Oh, I'm an idiot. I need a corresponding integer for that expected. Assigned user ID equals 95959, right? So this needs to change a little bit, right? An assigned user identifier is not null and is not created by user. Wordy, yes. However, what it's trying to explain is that these are different fields, right? So I'm testing the case that I should now go and acquire another thing, right? In the case where they are the same, then I want to validate that that I don't call acquire again on a user because I've already got that user. So acquire user is called for assigned user identifier. Right, so sender dot received dot acquire dot send new and then I call trick it well, basically exposing debug or otherwise private information from a device on a port this firewall off, then using SSH tunnels to make it available for you in your environment. Huh. What are you not liking there? Oh, it's a static. Since we do IoT at my new job, there are a lot of those. Ah, gotcha. Okay. So you need the information, but it's a pain to get to without. Okay, I get it. I wanted to use it to expose a full file list on my server, but I don't want that public, so I thought I'd set it up. Huh. Gotcha. So you get you get the information your SSH tunneled through anyway, so it just bypasses the firewall and still exposes it public. Okay. Okay, so this should fail. Acquire user and panning item is created, right? So it didn't create the panning item and didn't acquire, but it did call the other two, right? So now we need to go and back and get our acquired user. Acquired assigned user ID is command.assign user identifier is not null. Then await, otherwise null. Nice and easy way to require credentials to access info. Makes sense. So run those tests again. We get absolute failures now. Awesome. Oh, sorry. I need this to be in there as well, don't I? Acquire user, user identifier, expected, assign user identifier returns, expected, assigned user ID. Okay, so now these fail because it's going to get something it shouldn't do. Okay, so line 34. Why should that matter? That should not matter one jot. I wish when people jumped in and ask a question, it would be good to know why they care and if they want to know any more information. I got a question earlier about CQRS and it's like, that was it. Are you using CQRS? Yeah. No follow up. More Jim. So why did this fail? Because this can be null. Oh. Throughout everything in the result. Await dot by there you go. not exactly the best way, but it does at least do it, right? So basically, because this returns a result, then this is cast to a result of int, even though it's null. So then if I get it and there's an actual object there, then I get the value. So it doesn't matter whether it's success or failure, really. It will get the value. That's just something I'm just trying to think, hey, do I really want to do it that way? Is there a problem with it that way? I don't know. Returning the raw object, I don't think there's a need. But that being said, why is tenant ID and created by user ID working? Because they're resulting as well. Is it casting it to that type? If I do it this way, does it still fail? Hey, Radio Patrick, how you doing? It does. Why does that treat it differently? It's the nullable that's different. I think this is going to be one of those where it crashes when it actually goes to do entity framework stuff, but it's going to work fine for testing. When assigned user is same as created by user. Right, so again, I'm just in the interest of stream time, I'm going to copy and paste. Which I don't like doing that. Let's add all that in. Because the behavior here is almost identical. Except I just want to make sure I don't call something unnecessarily. So here, this is that. I can't do it that way. Ugh. They're read only. Constants. Can't make goods constants. Yeah, I think in this case I need to do range. Oh. So that shouldn't be there because I should expect not to receive this. Acquire user is not called for assigned user identifier. So in this instance, I don't want to make the second call because there's no need. It's the same user, so therefore, don't bother. So did not receive. Right. So this should fail. Just going to call it. Right. So I now need to make the code change to support that scenario. So in here, if it's not null, command.assigned user identifier equals not equal to command.created by user identifier, then that else null. That reads like yeah, we're gonna make this different. We're gonna make this a method because it's just extract method fetch assigned user ID. Okay, so in here now, we're going to say if command dot assign user identifier is null, return null. Right. No, I don't want to use null propagation. Right. If command dot assign user identifier equals command I'm almost out of time, unfortunately, but apparently Nginx's auto index feature has a lot of customizability options. Might you be able to put a delete button? Ah, being able to delete files. Nice. Nginx is quite capable. Well, I've primarily used Nginx for routing when I set up Kubernetes, I used Nginx to do the kind of domain resolution stuff to divert to the right services. So I used it as a proxy or reverse proxy. This doesn't work. Ugh. Int created by user. This is nasty. If command dot assign user identifier equals command dot created by user identifier return created by user ID. Oh yeah, that is pretty common. My case is super simple. It's literally just serving static files that are loaded by some sketchy C++ code. Yes. Otherwise, we're going to do this. I can't decide whether this makes this more readable or less readable overall, but we want created by. Pretty much common practice to make the cancellation token the last argument. Need to hop off. Have a good one. Rolf, thank you very much for hanging out. Appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day. Enjoy your social interactions. Take care. So, not the neatest piece of code. Passing created by user ID doesn't make much sense from the signature perspective, so it's not really telling the right story. But at least I'm able to break those statements down into, right, if it's null, return null, right? If it's the same identifier as created by cannot be null, so that's got to be something, then return the same ID, this. Otherwise, acquire the user and return that ID. So again, all I'm trying to do here is make sure I don't make an extra call here. So these tests should pass. Expected to receive no calls. Had to receive one. Did not receive acquire user for expected assigned user. Expected to receive no calls matching. It's received 4.5. The challenge is here. I have to debug it, otherwise I'm not going to see that ID. Because again, I'm not using set IDs. I think I've done in the past has been to there we go. So expected assigned user identifier. One of the things I've done in the past is I've set the I've basically created strings here and passed them so that I know exactly what the ID is. It doesn't make a big difference whether you do NuGUID or whatever, but if you need to know what these are, and then debugging is the only way of knowing. So I'm expect D5DE. Oh, of course, they're identical. Of course I'm receiving the call, because I'm receiving it for the create. They are identical, so I'm actually matching that one, so that's not going to happen. So is acquire user is only called right. So received 1 here should validate that perfectly. There you go. Okay. Update planning item will call require for user identifiers. Nice. Okay. So, great. That code tests, pass, etc. That's awesome. But now I have these to create, right? So, again, if you're just joining the stream, I'm using Kafka to distribute my data to, right now, this one service. As I create data in my main system or in the system, those events create integration events which publish the data to the wider system. Benefit being, if I need to know about tenants in planning, or I need to know about tenants in tickets, then the event will be there and I'll receive that data, right? And I get to keep my system nice and separate. The downside to using something like any sort of distributed messaging system is that you're not always guaranteed, and part of the reason that they're useful is because you're not always guaranteed to get the messages in any sort of order. So what gives it resilience is also it creates new problems, right? And that's common, right? Whatever you do, if you use one thing, it comes with its own inherent challenges, so you have to overcome those challenges. So in this case, I might receive a planning item. Planning item has a dependency on tenants and users, right? Now, I could insert the object and then have all my code query saying that object might not be there. So the user doesn't actually exist yet. It'll come later, don't worry about it, right? But a better way to do it, to keep the system integrity and not have to write those sorts of queries, is to create a dummy version of that object, right? Not a dummy, a placeholder version, right? So as I create my planning item, if the tenant hasn't been imported yet because the tenant queue is down, or that consumer's backed up for whatever reason, I will create a tenant record with default information, and then I can use the ID in my planning item. Same for users, right? If I need to create a user. Now, tenant users is a bit different, because tenant users is still going to have to acquire tenants and users. But that is the joining of the tenant and the user, right? but I don't need tenant user to exist for a planning item to create a tenant or a user. And I don't need to be responsible for that behavior, right? That's not my job, right? As the planning item import. This is a common challenge whenever you're dealing with distributed systems. So there might be some better patterns, there might be some better ways of doing things. I don't know, but this is my way of handling this, and it works for me. So these acquires are basically going to read like get thing. If thing is null, create thing, return ID of thing, right? And it's going to be rinse and repeat. So it might actually be that I can create a generic base handler that will work on the object and do the thing, right? Which would speed up this acquire design significantly. So application tests concerning acquiring tenant when tenant does not exist. Fact tenant is created. Fact result contains ID of new tenant. Range. Fact. So our subject in this case is our acquire tenant. Our subject. And in here, in a range, we're going to use subject equals new acquire tenant. Act subject that handle tenant identifier. And acquire tenant. Oh, that's not acquire tenant. That's acquire tenant. A handler is our subject. So, given that we're acquiring this, the that doesn't exist. So we now need to check the repository. So we don't have one of them yet. So let's create one of them. Repository of tenant repository. And that's that. And then, so here, tenant repository dot received add async r dot is tenant. And again, this is not the same pattern as in the rest of the application. So these objects I have full control over, so I don't have to jump through some hoops to protect values or data in here. X identify equals that, and x dot name equals string.empty. Right. Again, I'm stubbing out the object. I'm not trying to do. I don't need to put funny names in there or whatever. It just needs to be blank. If you were to actually you add an act async to your isn't fire async. So I'd have to make it all async and stuff. So yeah, I could do, but it doesn't really make a difference. This is only bad practice if you are. I'm only calling it here, so I don't see any. There's no harm in doing it that way. Just for the purpose of that. Yeah. I think. I don't know if XUnit supports async. No, now I need to know. Async tests. You can simply return a task. Right, but my constructor isn't going to be async. Because they're called from constructor, not from fact. And that can't be async. So no. So if I was calling these as part of the fact, then yes, I could make them asynchronous, but yeah. Yeah. So we need a result, private result, int, and this is in our Dallas result, result, and that is that, result dot, assert dot equal, result status dot, so it's dot okay, result dot status, assert dot equal result dot value, so this should be private read only int expected to an ID. That should be there, right? Oh man, yesterday was National Margarita Day. Yesterday was my 18th wedding anniversary. Wish I'd known that instead of going to kickboxing. And good morning, Deflux. How often do you run into that? You want to do some async stuff in a constructor? Not often, I would imagine. Thank you. Naturally, I drank way too many margaritas for Tuesday. Sadly for me, one margarita is too many. Today, Friday. Sadly, yes. I need to implement this now. Okay, so let's go acquire tenant. So we're going to inject a repository. I repository of tenant. Repository. Yeah. Our tenant. And actually, to make this pass, we don't need to do anything special. We can just do repository.add new tenant. Identifier equals command tenant identifier. And that's what I should do. I should make the test pass and not overanalyze the actual challenge. So async, and I do need this in this case to be here because I need the ID back from it. And this is where this gets a little bit messy because this isn't going to give me an ID, right? So I need to inject that repository. My test will fail. Right. Result contains ID. Expected 10,001, got 0. Right. So I didn't actually configure the mock to say, hey, when you call add. So here's the challenge. So when we call add, this doesn't return anything. Right. This actually needs to do, so I need to do when r goes to r dot add async arg dot is tenant t goes to t dot identifier equals expected tenant identifier. Okay, I have to go now. Do you work today? I do work today, sadly. But I got work in about 45 minutes. Actually, I do have work as well. Not like I can slack off today. Oh, well, hopefully I can catch the end when I get to the office. Yeah. Yeah. I'll be streaming. Knowing my luck, I'll be streaming. Right. I'll get into a conversation in the next 5 minutes and run the stream over by 20 minutes. But my team lead hasn't responded to like 8 of the pull requests, so I don't know what I'm going to do today. Chase the team lead. Okay, so yeah, this should mutate that call. This should mutate that and set the ID as it goes through. So when it calls it, let's see if it does it. Yes, it does. Okay, so that is my way of mocking the ID. Now the problem is whenever you're doing this sort of stuff, whenever you're using mocks and stuff for database level things, it might work well in code, but the moment you actually push it to use a database, things don't quite work the same. So we'll see what that looks like. But the problem with this is I've got to do so much stuff just to get to a point of integration or to test. It's very hard. So when tenant does exist, yeah. Fact. So in this case, result contains ID new tenant. Tenant is created. In this case, result contains ID of existing tenant. Hey Kashabox, how you doing? Doing software fast and loose. That just terrifies me. So again, let's keep things moving along for the sake of the stream, right? I don't like doing this, but it's pragmatic to move the stream forward rather than worrying too much about copying and pasting, and I do know what I'm doing, so in theory, right? So in this instance, what I want to do is I don't want to see add, right? I want to say tenant repository dot single default async arg.is where's that specification? Entity by identifier spec. Yeah, entity by identifier spec tenant. I probably got a base entity. Yeah. Gosh, I can't use that. I need to create a spec in here because I'm not using the base entities because these are not domain objects. These are pure data objects. I don't want to blur the lines. It would be easy to because I'm using a lot of the same patterns, but I don't want to blur the lines. This is a view only thing, right? So again, everything up here is domain and is kind of wrapped up with domain events, etc. Everything down here is just dumb objects that I'm storing, reading and writing to the database. Writing from integration perspective, reading from view perspective. So I don't want to get involved with trying to bring through complicated rules or extra pieces, but it would be very easy because they look almost identical to their write counterparts. So this spec, yes, it's useful, but it depends upon a base entity type that says, hey, you always have identifier. I don't have that, so specifications tenant by identifier spec. So again, this is a specification of tenant. It's an I single result of tenant. CTOR period tenant identifier query dot where q goes to q dot identifier equals tenant where. See, on my query. So that will pull that. So now in here I can do tenant by identifier spec. Now the problem is because the way that those work, I can't just. I've got to see if there's a pattern I can use to test that, because ultimately these are a little bit open-ended in that I could pass any spec and it would give me what I want. So the test would pass even though I haven't validated that I've passed it the right things. So yeah. So when I call that, I return a new tenant. Nope, work that way. ID equals, and again, because I'm in this world, Loki. Yeah, because I'm in this world, I can control this more. So then my result dot assert dot equal result starts okay. Assert dot equal expected tenant ID result dot value. Right. Now this test should fail because it shouldn't work that way, right? So it does that because what happens is it turns around and calls create, and it uses that new object because again the code is set up right now just to do the create. So now I need to actually go and test to see if I have the tenant. So var tenant equals await repository That'll do. Hi Shy, how you doing? If tenant is not null, return result.success tenant.id. Else tenant is this, right? And there's our plan. There's our tests. Yep. Well, thank you very much for stopping on by. It's good to see you. Apologies, I'm just checking to see if I sorry. Let's check on that. So we have an acquire tenant, yeah. Okay, so this is a little contrary to most advice, right? In that it's basically it's got a side effect, as Apex pointed out yesterday, right? So when I call this, it's called acquire tenant. I get an ID back, but if the thing doesn't exist, it will create the thing to make sure I get an ID back. So there is a side effect of doing it. So this not only does something but returns something, which is normally considered a poor practice, right? It should either do something or return something. It shouldn't do both. But I think as long as you understand the consequences of what you're doing and you're not doing this routinely, I don't see there's a massive problem to this. This does solve the problem. What happens when I receive a planning item before I receive a tenant? This will say, hey, get me a tenant, and it will stub out the tenant, and then the tenant message comes in and gets processed. They are highly unlikely to collide. But I could also put locks in here, right? So I can make sure that this is there. Good. I could also use, if I put a lock in here, I could also use acquire tenant in update tenant, right? So that I could actually say, hey, go and stub it out if it's not there, and then update it. That way, this code would always be called, even for an entity doesn't exist yet. So there's a few things I might hit once I start to produce this information, but we'll see. I'm not going to over-optimize or over-engineer those parts yet. Morning, Kenny. Oh, good day, Kenny. How are you doing? So let's proceed. So that's acquire tenant. And again, if you weren't aware, so Apex and I had not much of a discussion, but it was more. I wanted to understand more about the approach of using something like a priority queue and what that would mean. And so we kind of discussed that off stream yesterday. That might be something that I investigate doing independently as kind of a challenge stream of some form. Acquire tenant. So now we need acquire user, right? This has to be stubbed out. So let's do the same thing. Concerning acquiring tenant. Concerning acquiring user. When user does exit. So hold on. Yes, I know what I'm about to do. When user does exist. The code is going to look very similar. And I kind of want to move the stream forward, right? So I don't want to keep having these because again, this piece has gone on for 3 days, right? And I'm mindful of the fact that people understand what I'm trying to do. I'd rather get there. The difference between ID is a primary key or a composite key. I wish. Actually, I don't wish because I don't feel well. That would be bad. So I have an identifier. So if I say identifier is an ID that is passed around the system, right? Is a globally unique identifier. When I say ID, I mean the primary key column. So I actually have GUID identifiers. Yeah, I've not had a good week for my health, it seems. But no. Maybe. So, Canny, I'm not quite sure whether that was a question or if you wanted me to expand more upon what I'm doing. But yeah. So again, I'm referring to ID as a primary key column, an identifier as an identifier that I share around the system. So I'm verbally differentiating. So I understand, and I have set the practice in the software. If I say ID, I mean a column ID, like primary key ID, right? If I say identifier, I mean an identifier that is shared around the system, and that is, I can go and look at any table. So if I find a planning item in here with this identifier, I can go here and see that planning item by its same identifier. Their IDs will be different. No, I'm not. I'm never going to get into that sort of, well, I'm not going to get into that level of trying to educate, that's for certain. I'm not using composite keys, but yeah, so it might seem confusing because they're ID, they both are ID, but I'm verbally differentiating. No, I'm not combining them as a single composite key, no. A compound key, yeah. ID is ID, an identifier is identifier. So yes, I get that it's slightly confusing if you're looking at it, but yeah. Where I work. Yeah. Different IDs into one big ID for no reason. Again, I prefer having a primary key column of an integer, right? From a ordering perspective, from a lookup perspective, everything I know says that is faster than using a unique identifier. So looking these objects up by their ID will be quicker. If you think about it, an identifier, unique identifier, even if building an index over it, there's no ordering to it necessarily. Or it's harder to order because you're ordering by strings and numbers. So the ordering is harder. So that's got to be slower. But this way, I can have even if I rearrange my system, if I redesign things and break planning items out into 5 tables, as long as I'm presenting a planning item still and it has an identifier that's shared, I could refactor all this, and every other system's not going to care as long as it gets the events and stuff that it needs. So, but if I use the primary key ID and I pass that around, then that's going to get messier because now this might change, right? If I rearrange. So that's why I do it that way. Let's get rid of expected user identifier, expected user ID, expected user name. This is the existing case. User repository. Started to think this wasn't necessarily faster, but hey ho. Acquire user.handler. See, this is why I got into that pattern of the base entity. Or when you refactor your data model, things get messy. So user by identifier spec. This is a specification of user, I single result specification of user. This is going to be CTOR GUID user identifier query where u goes to u.identifier equals user identifier. That's my spec. So I generalize that out to a thing, but it's acquire user, takes an I repository, user. So I think there's probably a pattern here that I can kind of use, but we'll get there. That's that. That stops complaining. This needs to be user. Yeah, that's scary. Expected user identifier. Expected user ID. User is created. That we're going to come back on. This is going to create more of a challenge because there's more fields that are required. Thanks for streaming, Enter Drop. No worries, Apex. Thank you very much for hanging out. It's always appreciated. Hope you have a great day. Okay, so the challenge when you copy and paste like I just did, right, is I could end up in a situation where I rename things in here because I'm looking at the same thing. So it's very dangerous to do it that way. But the structure of the code is identical, right? These should fail because the code isn't implemented. But now I can go and implement the code and validate it, right? Work. Annie, thank you for the look. I'm about to finish anyway. Thank you for coming hanging out. I just want to finish this one up and then we can oh, I think people have been inspired to get back to streaming. I know who I'm raiding. We just started as well. Awesome. So again, if you're new to the stream, if you're just joining, I think I do get a lot of people that support in lurking. But if you are new to the stream, if you're wondering what I'm doing, if you're questioning what I'm doing, it's okay to ask. It's okay to converse. It's okay to push back on what I'm doing and challenge. I don't mind that. I'm happy to have a conversation. You know, so it's So don't be afraid if you want to converse on the stream. It's not. I don't need to worry about being distracted. Yeah. I was like, we can break up the cost of the thing over 3 months. They were like, best we can do it 36 months. So you end up paying, yeah. Yeah, I'm trying to get that sort of stuff under control, just to get it all organized and stuff. Okay, so let's go and implement acquire user, and then we should, yeah, we should be able to move on. So here var user equals repository dot so await repository dot single default async new user by identifier spec command dot user identifier cancellation token. So that gets to the user. If user is not null, right? We have a user already. Then we're going to return result dot success and then user dot ID. Otherwise, we're going to do user was new user, and this is where we're going to get into a challenge. So that works, but the problem is user has it's a nullable email on this one. Okay, so that's fine. Okay, that works. So we can get away with that one. So in the real system, user email is not nullable, right? You can't not have an email. But in this case, because I'm going to import the data, the other option would be to make it not nullable, and then do something like that as well. Email equals string.empty. Which might be clearer. But yeah. Actually, let's do that. When user does exist. Returns. I don't care about email. So this doesn't actually matter, right? Even that doesn't matter to the test, right? So it's a little bit more information than I need. I'll leave it in there for now, but and x.email equals string.empty. So in that case, what I'll do is I'll go to the script and I'll say this is not null, right? Let's see if that runs. Oh, yeah. Return result.success user ID. Cannot find an argument type. Entities tenant. What am I still doing wrong with tenant? Acquire user. Expected username. Expected username. Expected username. Oh. Considering acquiring user. Result contains ID of new user. Can I find an argument type view domain entity? So where do I do that? Oh yeah, user. The joy of copy and paste. There we go. So in theory, this works, right? Will it work? I don't know. But what should happen is when I receive a planning item integration event, that should go to update planning item. In update planning item, it should acquire the created by user ID, and that should then create or fetch the user. Do the same with the tenant, and then the assigned user ID would be decided there. And then ultimately, I should create a planning item with the IDs, and I should have a system that's intact, even if all I do is receive the planning item, right? So I don't think there's any data. Oh, there is data in here. So this could actually work if I start this up now. I can't because I don't have enough time to do the configuration and everything like that. But I will get that working. So what that will do is when it receives this event, it will then go and do that. If it receives the tenant user or the tenant user or the tenant user beforehand, those objects will exist, and I'll just acquire, when I acquire them, it will just give me the right IDs, the correct IDs back, not the right IDs. So it's a way of keeping the system integrity, right? I don't end up with a mess of, oh, when I do the view, I'm like, oh, well, if this object might not exist, this object might not exist. I can always guarantee the objects exist, even if it's empty. So I can build my queries with joins rather than left joins, with confident information gathering, and then I can, use something like GraphQL. GraphQL is not going to explode when an object doesn't exist, right? So again, I can put a GraphQL layer here and experiment with that, because I've not used GraphQL properly before, because I've normally been using the same database I've been writing to, and I think that often creates a problem. Your point, yeah. But I think it's one of those technologies that you have to use it correctly to understand the true power of it. I don't think I've used it correctly yet. And I think this will allow me to realize the use of it, because now I can expose a GraphQL endpoint that is, the planning items or the users, and just navigate down those objects. So you can pull as little or as much information as you want about the objects. I think that's where the power comes in from a UI perspective. I don't have to then mess around with endpoints for data, right? Oh, go get me the planning item. Now fetch the user. Now update this. Now update that. If you're exposing that data, and again, it's a read-only copy of the data, so it can be indexed. It can be optimized for those cases. And again, cached as well. That'll be a big thing for what I want to figure out is the caching. So caching at this layer makes no sense, right? Because I'm just pulling the object directly to update it, or I'm creating it at this layer, right? So I don't need caching on my write API, but on my read API, I could have a cache layer that helps. And again, also I can consume now all these objects to other things, reporting, search, all those other things can be built, and the UI can be built against this. Well, the main logic of the application, the behavior of the application is all tied up in the other side. So it's starting to feel like, it's starting to feel comfortable, I'll say. And I think that with a little bit more work, it definitely will I'm like a day or two away from being able to see the data. So yeah. Right, but again, the patterns that I'm setting in place accelerate me once I've got them in the structure. Right now, I'm building that initial plumbing. How long is this? Point taken. So, yeah. Well, the folks, I'm about to leave, so I'm going to raid over to Frank. Frank Boucher is a cloud architect. Looks like he's working on an Azure container app. So I'm going to raid over there. I will be back on Monday with some drink water. I don't know if I'll do a weekend stream this weekend, but if I do, it'll be a random stream and it won't be anything to do with this. It'll be bot stuff or maybe the game in the bot, etc. Yeah, that'll all depend on upon what my weekend looks like. So please join me in raiding Frank Bucheros. Thank you for hanging out. Thank you for the conversation as always. If I don't see you around, have a great weekend. And yeah, take care. Thank you all.